If a man who built an empire by controlling every outcome believes he can orchestrate his betrayal without consequences, what happens when the only variable he never accounted for, his pregnant wife's courage, becomes his ultimate undoing? There are some court cases that become urban legends before the verdict is even read. They don't just ripple through social circles, they shake the city to its core. This is one of those stories. On a gray Monday morning, the lobby of the downtown courthouse buzzed with something more than just the regular anxiety of legal battles. Even the security guards exchanged glances, knowing today was not like any other. It was the final day in the divorce hearing of Carter and Elaine Hastings, and the stakes were nothing short of monumental. If you lived within 50 miles, you'd heard their names. Carter Hastings, the Wall Street wizard, the youngest ever to make partner at the firm everyone secretly hated but publicly envied. Elaine Hastings, once the wife, always in the shadow, the subject of endless gossip columns and the star of precisely zero of her own headlines. Until now. Carter arrived in his signature style, the kind you see in movies but rarely in real life. Glossy black town car, dark sunglasses, tailored navy suit worth more than most people's annual salary. Around him, a swirl of legal aides, junior partners, and the infamous Jonathan Rayner, his lead attorney, known for destroying lives before lunch and celebrating victories with a glass of single malt scotch. Carter walked through the front doors as if he owned the building, chin high, lips curled into a half smirk. The air around him was heavy with the expectation of victory. Elaine, by contrast, entered almost unnoticed. She came alone, carrying a soft leather satchel that had seen better days. No flash, no fuss. Her dress was simple, navy blue, gently fitting her frame, neither expensive nor cheap, just quietly elegant. The only sign of emotion was the way she gripped the satchel strap for a heartbeat before releasing it as she passed through the metal detector. Some in the crowd barely recognized her. The few who did whispered, "That's her?" in tones thick with skepticism. The courtroom filled quickly. Reporters scrambled for seats. The city's most merciless gossip bloggers were there, eyes like hawks. Behind Carter sat his lawyer army, each with a laptop open, stacks of color-coded files at the ready, expressions of bored confidence. Beside Elaine, just one young woman, her attorney, Olivia Park, barely 30, no famous cases under her belt, no aura of invincibility, but she looked at Elaine with a kind of fierce loyalty rarely seen in these circles. As the judge entered, the room settled into an anxious hush. Carter leaned over to Jonathan Rayner and murmured, "Let's get this over with." Jonathan just nodded, eyes already locked on the judge, ready to pounce at the first opportunity. Opening arguments began. Carter's legal team wasted no time. They painted Carter as the architect of an empire, a man who'd risen from nothing to a life most people could only dream of. His portfolio was legendary: downtown penthouses, rare art collections, a small fleet of vintage cars, shares in tech companies about to go public. He was a job creator, a philanthropist. He was, Jonathan argued, the backbone of their shared fortune. And Elaine? She was a gracious hostess, a charming companion, but never more than that. They called her unambitious, comfortable in the background. Their tone suggested she should be grateful for the life she'd been gifted, as if she'd won some cosmic lottery the day she married Carter Hastings. Elaine did not speak, not once, not when they questioned her contributions, not when they flashed photos of her at charity galas, always smiling next to Carter, always perfectly in place. Her eyes never left the judge's face, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The real show began when Carter's team moved for asset division. They demanded everything: the homes, the investments, the accounts. Mrs. Hastings is entitled to a generous settlement, but nothing approaching half, Jonathan declared. The majority was earned through Mr. Hastings' acumen and risk. Reporters' pens flew. Phones clicked under benches. Some smirked, thinking Elaine would crumble, maybe cry, maybe beg for mercy. Then Olivia Park stood up. No grand gestures, no dramatic voice. She slid a slim folder across the table. The judge opened it. The room was silent except for the clicking of the judge's glasses as she read. Inside were documents, emails, bank statements, signed agreements, and most important, a prenuptial clause so obscure that Carter himself had forgotten it existed. The clause stated that if Carter was ever unfaithful and concealed assets or income, Elaine's share would rise to 90%. The emails showed Carter's secret accounts, offshore transfers, even coded language between him and a private banker. And there was more. A video clip, grainy but clear, of Carter and his assistant on a weekend in the Bahamas when he claimed to be in London on business. Carter's face went pale. The room, so full of tension and arrogance minutes before, now felt suffocating with shock. Jonathan Rayner scrambled for words, but there were none. Elaine still said nothing. She didn't need to. The judge closed the folder. In a voice so calm it was terrifying, she announced her ruling. The evidence is clear. The agreement stands. Mrs. Hastings will receive 90% of all shared assets, as outlined in the prenuptial contract. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Carter sank in his seat, lips trembling. Elaine stood, gathering her bag. The courtroom watched, almost reverent, as she walked out without a backward glance. No tears, no rage, just a silent smile. And that's how the city learned that sometimes losing everything means winning more than you ever imagined. Before she was a headline, before she was the most talked about woman in the city, Elaine Hastings was simply Elaine Miller. Born and raised in the sleepy town of Willow Creek, she grew up in a world far removed from the luxury and chaos of Carter Hastings' empire. Willow Creek had one grocery store, 2 stoplights, and a library that doubled as the community center. It was the kind of town where everyone knew your business before you did, and where life moved with the seasons, gentle and predictable. Elaine's father, Robert Miller, was a mechanic. He worked long hours in a greasy blue jumpsuit, coming home late but always managing to sit down for dinner with the family. Her mother, Diane, worked as a nurse at the local hospital, patching up broken bones and handing out gentle advice to anyone who needed it. They weren't rich, but their home was filled with laughter, warmth, and an unshakable sense of loyalty. As a child, Elaine was a quiet force of nature, curious, fiercely independent, and possessed of a kindness that disarmed even the crankiest neighbors. She was the girl who helped stray animals, tutored classmates who were struggling, and always volunteered for town fundraisers. Yet she was never the center of attention. Elaine didn't need the spotlight to feel whole. Her confidence came from within, not from applause or approval. She was an honor student, valedictorian of her high school class, and won a scholarship to a small liberal arts college upstate. There, she majored in English literature, spending her nights lost in novels and her days working at the campus bookstore. She was practical, always saving, always budgeting, always careful. Friends described her as the one you call at 3 a.m. when everything falls apart, because she always picked up and she always listened. Elaine didn't grow up dreaming of ballrooms or billionaires. She imagined a life of purpose, maybe as a teacher, a librarian, or a writer. But fate had other plans. The summer before her senior year, she interned in New York City at a small publishing house. The city felt like another planet, loud, dazzling, intimidating, but also electrifying. She shared a shoebox apartment with 2 other girls and lived off instant noodles and hope. It was here, on an unbearably humid afternoon, that she met Carter Hastings. The story isn't glamorous. She spilled coffee on his shirt at a corner cafe. He was charming, self-assured, and apologetic, laughing off the stain and offering to buy her another cup. They started talking, and within an hour, Elaine was both smitten and unnerved. Carter had a way of making the world seem small and manageable, like anything was possible. He asked for her number, and she gave it, feeling both flattered and a little out of her depth. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Carter sent flowers to her office, invited her to art galleries, and whisked her off for rooftop dinners under the city lights. He was attentive, generous, and always seemed to know exactly what to say. Elaine's friends warned her to be careful. Guys like Carter weren't real life. But he made her feel seen in a way no one ever had. They married less than a year later in a small ceremony, just family and a handful of friends. Elaine wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and Carter's parents gave them a down payment on a spacious condo. To everyone else, it looked like a fairy tale. But fairy tales don't last forever, and soon enough, cracks began to show. Elaine learned to navigate Carter's world with grace, but never really belonged. She attended black tie galas and charity balls, always dressed perfectly, always smiling politely. But behind closed doors, she was still the same small-town girl who missed her parents and longed for the simple things, Sunday mornings with pancakes, evenings with a good book, laughter that didn't feel rehearsed. She tried for years to make it work. She learned the rules of Carter's social circles, hosted dinner parties, and memorized the names of all his business contacts. She listened to his ambitions, his frustrations, his relentless drive for more. She was his confidant, his sounding board, his biggest fan. But as Carter's success grew, so did the distance between them. Carter changed. He became obsessed with status, with image, with being the best. He started coming home later, taking more trips, and bringing his work home with him. The warmth that once defined their relationship turned to cold routine. Elaine stopped asking questions, stopped expecting honesty. She poured herself into charity work, volunteering at a local shelter and mentoring young women who reminded her of herself. A little lost, a little hopeful, a little underestimated. If you asked anyone in Carter's world, they'd tell you Elaine was lovely, sweet, supportive. They'd say she was lucky to have him. Few ever asked what Elaine wanted, or if she was happy. Fewer still realized that beneath her gentle exterior was a mind sharp as glass, a will forged in the fires of quiet struggle. Elaine never complained, never demanded, never raised her voice. She was invisible when she needed to be, present when it counted. The city saw her as background, a soft-spoken accessory to her husband's empire. But she was watching, learning, remembering every slight and every kindness, cataloging every secret Carter let slip in moments of arrogance. By the time Carter's infidelities became impossible to ignore, Elaine wasn't surprised. She had already stopped loving the man he became, and started loving herself again. She went back to school quietly, earning a certificate in financial planning. She reconnected with old friends, built her own support system, and started keeping careful records of everything Carter tried to hide. When the moment came to fight for her dignity and her future, Elaine wasn't afraid. She was ready. The woman no one saw coming was about to become the woman no one could forget. The world Carter Hastings occupied wasn't just about money. It was about spectacle. The kind of spectacle that sparkled from the penthouses overlooking Central Park, that hummed in the corridors of old money clubs, that dripped from the walls of auction houses where art was currency, and a glance could decide a fortune. Elaine entered this world like an understudy thrust on stage, learning her lines as the curtain rose. But she watched, she learned, and she never forgot that she was a visitor, never a native. The Hastings' main residence was the stuff of glossy magazine spreads, a $30 million triplex atop the city's most exclusive address, glass walls that turned the skyline into a living mural, rooms big enough to echo. There was a library with first edition classics locked behind glass, a rooftop garden that hosted parties no one ever forgot, and a walk-in closet that was a monument to Carter's taste for excess. Every inch of the apartment was curated to communicate not just wealth, but dominance. The doorman was a former Olympic boxer. The chef had 2 Michelin stars. The security system cost more than most people's homes. But Carter didn't just own an apartment. He owned a lifestyle, a string of country club memberships, a Hamptons estate with its own vineyard, a private suite at Madison Square Garden, and a yacht anchored in Sag Harbor. His circle of friends included venture capitalists, tech moguls, fashion designers, and the occasional senator. Invitations to their events came in silk-lined envelopes with embossed calligraphy that smelled faintly of expensive cologne. Elaine moved through these spaces like a ghost, always present, rarely noticed. At the annual Hastings Autumn Gala, she watched as caterers set up towers of oysters and string quartets rehearsed in the marble foyer. The guest list was a who's who of New York's elite, some genuinely powerful, others famous only for being famous. Carter loved the attention, the casual way he could drop a comment and set the room buzzing. He thrived on applause, on being seen, on knowing that everyone wanted what he had, or at least what he pretended to have. Elaine, by contrast, observed everything. She saw the way Carter's friends greeted her, courteous but never quite warm. She listened to their backhanded compliments, their probing questions, their endless curiosity about her background, her plans, her lack of ambition. In these rooms, your worth was measured not by kindness or intellect, but by how effortlessly you wore the mask of belonging. Elaine's mask was flawless, but she always felt the weight of it pressing against her skin. She learned that power in this world was a game, and the rules were written by men like Carter. There was a language of casual cruelty, the way people were dismissed with a glance, the way a single whisper could ruin a reputation, the way generosity was always transactional. Elaine watched women smile through humiliation, watched men lie without blinking, watched alliances form and crumble over the course of a single dinner. At home, the mask slipped. Carter would pace the marble floors, barking orders into his phone, oblivious to anything outside his work. He obsessed over stock prices, board meetings, and quarterly earnings. The apartment was filled with his presence, but always empty of warmth. Elaine would read in the quiet corners, or walk the rooftop garden alone at sunset, longing for the small joys she once took for granted. A dog barking, a neighbor waving, a breeze through open windows. The Hamptons estate was a different kind of theater. Weekends of parties by the pool, catered brunches, and polo matches. Carter relished being the center of attention, always hosting, always closing a deal, always finding new ways to remind people of his status. Elaine played her part perfectly. Sun hats, linen dresses, polite laughter. But her heart was never in it. She was the outsider in the middle of paradise. The city clubs were the true heart of Carter's world. Places where handshakes sealed mergers and off-the-record conversations shaped the future of entire industries. Elaine went when she had to, sitting through dinners with bankers and politicians, always careful never to say too much. She saw the way women were sidelined, talked over, or ignored. She heard the stories that were never supposed to leave those mahogany-paneled rooms. And she filed every one away, never knowing when a piece of gossip, a whispered secret, or a passing comment would prove useful. Elaine learned to move quietly, to blend in, to absorb the culture of power without being consumed by it. She made a few genuine friends, an artist's wife, a charitable heiress, a woman who had survived her own scandal and rebuilt her life from the ashes. These women became her lifeline, her confidants in a world that never really wanted her. Carter's business was not just finance, but perception. Everything depended on the illusion of control. He hired the best publicists, the savviest crisis managers. He was photographed at galas, fundraisers, art openings, always with Elaine on his arm. To the world, they were perfect, a vision of beauty, wealth, and sophistication. But behind closed doors, the distance between them grew like a crack in glass. Elaine retreated further into herself. She volunteered at a literacy program downtown, away from the cameras, away from the pressure. She met people who reminded her of home, teachers, nurses, young mothers, students struggling to make rent. Their stories grounded her, reminded her of who she was before Carter, before the trappings of wealth, before she learned to smile on command. The main setting of Elaine's life became a series of contrasts, public opulence and private emptiness, surface glamour and silent longing. She learned to navigate both worlds, never fully belonging to either. She knew the taste of champagne and the ache of loneliness. She wore diamond earrings but missed the comfort of a simple hug from someone who truly understood her. In these glittering halls, Elaine was always underestimated, always seen as the quiet wife, the pretty shadow behind the powerful man. But beneath the calm, beneath the silence, a storm was building. She was not content to remain a footnote in Carter's story. She was ready to become the author of her own. Every story needs a villain. Sometimes he's the obvious monster. Sometimes he wears a mask so perfect that the world mistakes him for a hero. Carter Hastings was the second kind. To his friends, he was charming, successful, the man who could walk into any room and own it. But to those who truly watched, who paid attention to the things he thought no one noticed, he was something else entirely. Carter had mastered the art of deception long before he ever met Elaine. He understood how to shape his own narrative, how to be whoever people wanted him to be. In business, he was ruthless but charismatic. He always knew what to say to close a deal, to calm investors, to keep enemies guessing. He knew how to throw lavish parties for charity while quietly siphoning off influence for himself. He could make generosity look like a favor you owed him, not the other way around. With Elaine, he played the part of the loving husband for as long as it suited him. Early in their marriage, he was attentive, bringing her flowers, writing little notes, making grand romantic gestures that left her breathless. He was the kind of man who made you feel like the only woman in the world. until he didn't. Slowly, those gestures faded. Work came first. Calls went unanswered, texts left unread. Dinners grew silent, and arguments flared over the smallest things. Elaine tried to believe it was just the pressure of his job. She blamed herself for not understanding the world he lived in. She told herself she could be better, more supportive, more patient. But Carter wasn't just changing. He was revealing who he had always been. The first real warning came one evening during a party at their penthouse. Elaine was in the kitchen, refreshing a tray of hors d'oeuvres, when she overheard Carter laughing with his friends in the next room. "She's sweet, but honestly, she's a placeholder, a soft landing while I build the empire." The words hit Elaine like a slap. She felt her breath catch, but she said nothing, serving food with a practiced smile as the laughter echoed in her ears. After that, the mask slipped more often. Carter came home later and later, often smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. He began taking calls behind closed doors, whispering in hushed tones. Elaine noticed the credit card bills growing. Expensive dinners, hotel stays, gifts from luxury boutiques she'd never seen. The final straw came in the form of a photograph. Carter, arm in arm with a woman half his age at a private club in the city, their faces close, his wedding ring conspicuously missing. The woman was not a stranger. Madison Lee, an up-and-coming publicist in Carter's circle, known for her beauty and her ambition. Elaine had met her once, at a charity luncheon. Madison's handshake was limp, her smile sharp as a knife. Elaine remembered thinking there was something hungry in Madison's eyes, a drive to be seen, to win, no matter the cost. The betrayal was not just emotional, it was public. The tabloids caught wind of the affair, splashing Carter's infidelity across their websites. Headlines screamed about Wall Street's favorite power couple in crisis. Friends called with concern thinly veiled as curiosity. Elaine's social media filled with backhanded sympathy and veiled gloating. Carter, for his part, shrugged it off. "It's all part of the game," he told her. "They'll forget by next week." But Elaine didn't forget. The pain hardened her. She stopped asking Carter where he was going or when he'd be home. She started seeing the world with clear eyes, understanding that Carter's power came from taking what he wanted, no matter who got hurt along the way. She watched the way he manipulated people, promising favors he never delivered, making enemies of former friends, and always putting himself first. In business, Carter was even colder. He destroyed competitors with a handshake and a smile, then toasted their downfall with vintage champagne. He fired employees by email. He had a team of lawyers and fixers on retainer to bury scandals, to threaten lawsuits, to silence anyone who got too close to the truth. Rumors swirled that he'd done far worse: insider trading, tax evasion, even blackmail. But nothing ever stuck. He was too careful, too connected, too smart. The only person Carter underestimated was Elaine. He saw her as weak, naive, a relic from a life he'd outgrown. He bragged to friends that she'd never leave, that she needed him, that she'd fall apart without his money, his name, his protection. He never saw the storm building behind her quiet eyes. Carter's downfall began the night he brought Madison to a black-tie gala. It was the annual New York Philanthropy Ball, the kind of event where appearances were everything. Carter arrived with Madison on his arm, ignoring the shocked whispers, the flashbulbs, the questions. Elaine was there, standing alone in a midnight blue gown, her head high, her posture perfect. For the first time, she didn't shrink in his presence. She met his eyes and held his gaze, refusing to look away. That night, Carter made a public spectacle of his betrayal, toasting Madison in front of the city's elite, laughing as if nothing could touch him. But beneath the laughter, there was a crack in his armor, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he'd gone too far. Elaine left the gala early, her heart pounding, her resolve hardening. She knew now that Carter was not just flawed. He was dangerous. He would burn the world down before he let someone else win. But Elaine wasn't afraid anymore. She was done being a casualty in his story. She was ready to become the hero of her own. And Carter Hastings, for all his power, all his arrogance, had no idea just how dangerous a woman like Elaine could be when she decided to fight back. No one forgets the night everything changed. In high society, humiliation isn't just private heartbreak. It's a performance, a spectacle with a hungry audience. And Carter Hastings was about to give them a show they'd talk about for years. It was the annual Hastings Autumn Gala, a signature event in New York's social calendar, held in the dazzling ballroom of their own penthouse. A night for charity, luxury, and self-congratulation, it attracted everyone who was anyone. Bankers, celebrities, politicians, influencers, even a few journalists who knew the cost of silence. Crystal chandeliers glowed above tables set with gold-rimmed china, while a string quartet played softly beneath a grand floral arch. Waiters floated through the room with silver trays and champagne flutes, the air thick with expensive perfume and expensive secrets. Elaine had always played hostess at these events, managing details with quiet grace, making guests feel welcome, smoothing over awkward moments before they became gossip. But this year was different. She'd barely slept, her nerves tight, her mind replaying Carter's betrayals again and again. Still, she moved through the crowd, offering smiles, shaking hands, listening to compliments that felt more like weapons. Carter, for his part, was in his element. He was everywhere at once, joking with tech moguls at the bar, clinking glasses with politicians, taking selfies with reality stars. And Madison Lee was never far from his side. Her laughter high and clear, her eyes flicking toward Elaine with poorly hidden triumph. It was as if Carter wanted everyone to see, wanted to make his betrayal public and irreversible. Rumors had been swirling for weeks, but tonight Carter confirmed them for the world to see. Just after the live auction, a spectacle for the cameras, he pulled Madison onto the dance floor as the orchestra switched to a sultry jazz number. The room hushed, all eyes turning to the couple at its center. Elaine felt the weight of hundreds of glances, some sympathetic, some eager for drama, some coldly amused. Carter spun Madison beneath the lights, laughing loudly, then leaned in to kiss her in front of everyone. The cameras flashed, guests gasped, and a ripple of whispers broke through the room. Elaine stood frozen, her hands clenched at her sides, her heart hammering in her chest. The humiliation was total, so public, so calculated, so cruel. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Elaine saw her entire marriage in flashbacks. The promises, the late nights waiting up, the empty bed, the growing loneliness. She remembered the kindness she had shown Carter, the sacrifices, the ways she'd changed herself to fit his world. And now, all of it was unraveling in the most brutal way possible. A few old friends tried to come to her side, offering awkward words and insincere hugs, but Elaine was numb. Her mind buzzed with the questions. How much had Carter planned this? Was this his way of erasing her from the story? Did he really think she would just disappear quietly without a fight? But the worst was still to come. Just as the song ended, Carter led Madison up onto the stage, taking the microphone from the bandleader. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," Carter said, his voice booming with self-assurance. "Tonight, we celebrate not just another successful year, but new beginnings. I want to thank everyone who supported me, and, especially, those who've supported us." He glanced at Madison, who flashed a victorious smile. The implication was clear. Elaine was history. Madison was the future. A roar of applause swept the room, some genuine, some just eager to be part of the moment. Elaine felt herself shrinking, the walls closing in. She forced herself to stay standing, to keep her chin up, but her vision blurred with tears she would not let fall. The cruelty of Carter's performance was breathtaking. There was no respect, no attempt to spare her dignity. In this world, weakness was fatal, and Carter wanted to make sure she was seen as the loser. Reporters were already pushing forward, snapping photos, whispering headlines into their phones. By morning, the city would know. Carter Hastings had discarded his wife in front of their closest friends and most powerful enemies. Elaine would be branded not just as heartbroken, but as obsolete. The pain was overwhelming, but something inside her refused to break. She excused herself, slipping through a side door onto the balcony. The cold night air stung her cheeks, helping her catch her breath. The city stretched out below, indifferent to her suffering, alive with the endless hum of traffic and neon. Elaine gripped the railing, willing herself not to collapse. She replayed the humiliation in her mind. Each word, each laugh, each cutting glance. Carter hadn't just betrayed her. He'd tried to erase her, to turn her into a cautionary tale. But as she looked out over the city, Elaine felt the beginnings of something else. A resolve, cold and steady, building inside her. She would not let Carter write the ending to her story. She would not be defined by this night. Somewhere deep inside, she realized she still had power. She still had choices, and more than anything, she still had herself. The public betrayal was complete. Carter had shown his true face to the world, and Elaine had been left to pick up the pieces. But the pieces were sharper than he realized. The world might see her as defeated, broken, humiliated, but they were wrong. Elaine wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and turned back toward the party. She would play her part a little longer. But this time, she wasn't playing to survive. She was playing to win. After the lights faded from the ballroom and the final guests trickled out, Elaine stood in the echoing emptiness, numb and exhausted. The scene replayed over and over in her head. Carter's laughter, Madison's smile, the flash of cameras, the faces turning away as if her pain was contagious. For years, she'd kept herself together for the sake of appearances, always putting others first, always pushing her feelings aside. Tonight, she couldn't do it anymore. She didn't remember how she got home. Maybe the driver took pity on her and made no small talk. Maybe she walked the last blocks herself, letting the city's midnight chill cut through the days. When she finally closed the apartment door behind her, it all came crashing down. Alone in the dark, surrounded by the trappings of a life that felt borrowed, Elaine allowed herself to fall apart. First came the tears, quiet and unending. She slid down against the door and buried her face in her hands, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. The silence of the penthouse mocked her, so much space, so much emptiness. The city outside sparkled, but inside she was drowning. Every image from the night burned in her mind. The feel of strangers' eyes judging her, the sound of Carter's voice as he celebrated his new beginning, the applause as he paraded his betrayal. The humiliation wasn't just public, it was total, cutting her deeper than any insult could. She couldn't call her parents. She couldn't call friends. Most had already chosen sides, and she didn't have the energy to sort kindness from curiosity. Her phone buzzed with texts and voicemails, but she let them pile up, unable to read the words or face more pity. Hours passed. She sat in the dark, replaying every moment of her marriage. She remembered the early days, how safe she had felt in Carter's arms, the whispered promises, the laughter, the plans for a future built together. Where had it all gone wrong? When had Carter changed? Or was it just that she'd finally seen who he really was? Elaine got up and wandered the apartment, passing photos of smiling faces, souvenirs from happier vacations, evidence of a life that now felt like a lie. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floors. In the closet, Carter's suits hung in precise rows, untouched. In the bathroom, his cologne still sat on the counter, a scent that used to mean comfort and now brought only pain. She splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection. Her eyes were red and swollen, her makeup smeared, her mouth trembling. She barely recognized herself, a woman broken, abandoned, forgotten. "How did it come to this?" she whispered. "Who am I without him?" A wave of despair washed over her. What if Carter was right? What if she really was nothing without his name, his money, his world? What if she had wasted all those years believing in a fairy tale that was never real? The self-doubt was suffocating. She tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Madison's face, Carter's smile, the ballroom full of silent witnesses. She curled into a ball, clutching a pillow, rocking herself through the waves of grief. Morning crept in slowly, turning the city gold outside her window, but inside everything felt gray. Days blurred together. Elaine drifted through them like a ghost, unable to eat, unable to think straight. She canceled appointments, ignored calls, stopped answering the door. She let the world shrink until it was just her pain, and the ticking of the clock on the wall. But in her darkest moments, a small voice inside her refused to give up. It was stubborn and soft, almost drowned by the noise of heartbreak, but it was there. It told her that she was more than what Carter had tried to make her. It reminded her of who she had been before, strong, compassionate, resilient. It was the voice of her mother telling her stories of courage. The voice of her father saying, "Get back up, kiddo." The voice of the girl who had faced hard things and survived. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Elaine began to move. She made tea and drank it, forcing herself to swallow even when food had no taste. She'd opened the curtains to let sunlight in, even if it made the loneliness sharper. She showered, brushed her hair, put on fresh clothes. Each act was a rebellion against despair. One morning, as she sat at the kitchen counter, she opened a notebook and began to write. Not about Carter, or Madison, or the betrayal, but about herself. The real Elaine, the girl from Willow Creek, the daughter, the friend, the woman who had loved and lost but was still here. The more she wrote, the more she remembered her own voice, her own dreams. She filled page after page, letting the pain pour out until the words began to change. The anger sharpened her grief, and the injustice of it all started to burn. For years, she'd been told to stay silent, to keep the peace, to play her role. Now, with nothing left to lose, Elaine began to wonder, what if she stopped playing by their rules? What if she fought for herself, even if no one else believed in her? The city outside was moving on, but Elaine's world was changing. Rock bottom was devastating, but it was also solid ground. From here, she could build something new. She didn't know what it would look like, but for the first time in a long while, she was curious. She stood in the quiet, facing the city, feeling the first spark of resolve flicker inside her chest. She'd been broken, yes. But she was not finished. Her tears had been real. Her pain was valid, but neither would define her. This was her turning point. Carter thought he'd ended her story, but he was wrong. The woman he tried to erase was about to become impossible to ignore. For weeks, Elaine moved through her life like a shadow, quietly gathering her strength, quietly gathering her wits. The world had already written her off. Most of her so-called friends dropped away, invitations dried up, and social media hummed with whispers about the poor Mrs. Hastings. But what no one knew, what Carter especially didn't know, was that Elaine had been preparing for this moment long before the gala humiliation. It started the year before, when Carter's behavior changed. She saw the late-night emails, the quick calls he took in another room, the unexplained trips, and the growing distance. Elaine never confronted him directly. Instead, she started quietly documenting everything. Bank statements, credit card bills, travel receipts, all copied and stored. She paid attention to conversations at Carter's business dinners, the whispered gossip at the clubs, the rumors about secret investments. She'd always been overlooked, dismissed as just the wife. That invisibility was now her greatest weapon. One afternoon, as the autumn leaves fell outside her window, Elaine sat across from her attorney, Olivia Park, the same young lawyer who had stood by her side in court. Olivia had grown up in a family of immigrants, working twice as hard for half the credit, and her drive matched Elaine's own. They pored over the folders Elaine had brought. "This is incredible," Olivia breathed, flipping through the pages. "You've documented everything. Offshore accounts, undisclosed assets, even emails proving Carter's intent to hide them." Elaine nodded, her jaw set. "I want to do this the right way. No drama, just facts, but I'm not walking away empty-handed." Olivia smiled for the first time in weeks. "We're not just fighting for what you deserve. We're setting a precedent. For every woman who's ever been told to stay quiet can go quietly." What Carter had never understood was that Elaine wasn't helpless. She'd grown up in a world where you learned to fix what was broken, to find a way out even when the door was locked. Her parents had taught her resilience, not revenge. She'd used those lessons to survive New York's high society, but now she was ready to use them for herself. There was one more secret, too. One Carter could never have anticipated. Years ago, after a miscarriage early in their marriage, Elaine had inherited a trust from her late grandmother, Clara Miller. Clara was a legend in Willow Creek, a woman who'd started her own business in the 1950s and built it into a small empire. She believed in hard work and never flaunted her wealth. But she left Elaine a gift with clear instructions. "Don't ever let someone make you small. This is for the day you need to stand on your own." Elaine had never touched the trust money. She'd wanted to make her own way, to prove to herself and Carter that she was a partner, not a dependent. But now, as she faced the scorched earth Carter had left, she realized that strength sometimes meant accepting help from those who truly loved you, even if they were gone. With Olivia's guidance, Elaine began quietly putting her plan in motion. She moved her things out of the penthouse while Carter was on yet another business trip with Madison. She opened new accounts, transferred her grandmother's trust to a secure institution, and began investing in herself, her own education, her own future. She hired a private investigator to track down the last pieces of Carter's financial trail. Every move was strategic. Every detail was documented. Meanwhile, Carter basked in the attention. He was photographed at charity events with Madison, gave interviews about his fresh start, and even made snide remarks about Elaine to the press. "She'll land on her feet," he said with a dismissive smile. "I wish her well." His arrogance was blinding. He truly believed he'd won. The divorce proceedings resumed in a packed courtroom. Carter arrived with his high-profile legal team, certain that he'd walk away richer, his reputation intact. Elaine entered quietly, wearing a tailored suit, not flashy, but powerful. She met Carter's gaze, steady and unflinching. Olivia carried the folders and files they'd prepared, months of evidence, the ironclad prenup, the proof of Carter's deception. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for fairness, listened as Olivia laid out the facts. Carter's lawyer objected, tried to spin the narrative, but the truth was too clear. Each document was a nail in the coffin of Carter's case. The final blow was the prenup clause. If Carter ever lied about his finances or cheated, Elaine was entitled to 90% of their marital assets. Carter's mask cracked. For the first time, he looked unsure, even frightened. Elaine felt a quiet surge of satisfaction. Not triumph, not revenge, just the knowledge that the truth was finally out. But the twist wasn't just about money or winning a legal battle. It was about Elaine finally claiming her own power. After the hearing, she walked past the press without a word, stepping into the sunlight, head held high. She wasn't the same woman who'd been humiliated on the ballroom floor. She was someone new, stronger, sharper, and in control. She used part of her grandmother's trust to fund scholarships for young women in Willow Creek, giving others the chance she'd once been given. She started consulting for nonprofits, sharing her experience with others in need. She built a new home, not as Carter's wife, but as Elaine Miller, a woman defined not by what she lost, but by what she refused to give up. The world was slow to catch on. Some people still whispered behind her back. Some tabloids tried to paint her as a gold digger, others as a tragic victim. But Elaine didn't care. She had her freedom, her dignity, and a future she could finally call her own. The twist was simple, but profound. Elaine had never needed Carter. It was Carter who needed her, and by the time he realized it, she was already gone. Elaine's life after the courtroom victory did not start with fireworks. It began with silence, a deep, unhurried quiet, as if the universe itself was giving her permission to breathe for the first time in years. She stood in her new apartment, smaller than the penthouse, yes, but filled with sunlight, soft rugs, and windows that opened wide to the world outside. She realized she could arrange her furniture however she wanted. She could leave her shoes by the door, drink coffee at noon, and play her favorite records loud. For the first time in her adult life, every decision was hers. The first thing Elaine did was throw out every object that reminded her of Carter. The monogrammed towels, the crystal decanter he'd never let her use, the designer shoes he picked out to make her look the part. It was cleansing, cathartic, like scrubbing away a film of someone else's dreams. She kept only what was truly hers: old photographs, a small collection of well-worn novels, and a locket her mother had given her as a girl. These things went on her new shelves, their presence quiet but powerful. Next came her personal makeover, not a transformation for others to admire, but one for herself. She cut her hair short, sharp, and elegant. The new style framed her face, making her green eyes seem brighter, more determined. She traded in the soft, neutral wardrobe Carter preferred for pieces that made her feel bold: crisp white blouses, tailored pants, a bright red scarf. She found herself experimenting with color and shape for the first time, standing in front of the mirror and asking, "What do I like?" instead of, "What will he think?" It wasn't just her look that changed. Elaine worked on her mindset too. She read every self-development book she could find. She meditated each morning, sitting cross-legged in a patch of sun and breathing through her doubts and fears. She started therapy, unpacking the pain she'd carried for years, learning to spot the signs of manipulation and self-doubt before they could take hold again. Each session was like peeling away a layer, finding more strength beneath. Professionally, Elaine stepped into a new identity. She used her skills and experience, the ones she developed in silence behind Carter's success, to launch her own consulting business. At first, it was terrifying. She built her own website, wrote her own mission statement, and reached out to old contacts who remembered her warmth and intelligence, not just her last name. She was shocked when the first client signed on. A nonprofit in need of a strategy overhaul, a local bakery wanting to expand, a women's shelter looking for a new fundraising approach. Each victory was small but real. With every solved problem, every thank you email, every check that arrived with her own name on it, Elaine's confidence grew. She didn't need Carter's network. She built her own, from the ground up, with the kind of honesty and resilience no one could take away. It wasn't about making headlines anymore. It was about building something that lasted. Her new apartment became a sanctuary, filled with the laughter of new friends, the warmth of homemade meals, and the gentle chaos of freedom. She hung her mother's locket in the entryway, a daily reminder that love and courage could come from the simplest things. She hosted small dinners, inviting people she trusted, women who'd survived their own storms, men who valued her mind and her kindness, clients who became friends. Her circle was smaller, but every relationship was real. Elaine also reconnected with her roots. She visited Willow Creek, spending time with her parents, volunteering at the local library, sharing her story with young women who dreamed of more. She spoke at the high school graduation, standing on the gymnasium stage and telling her own truth about heartbreak, about loss, about finding strength when it seems impossible. Her words resonated. Afterward, girls lined up to talk, their voices trembling with hope. "You made me believe I can do anything," one whispered. "You already can," Elaine replied, hugging her tight. The media, of course, tried to twist her story. Paparazzi waited outside her building, hoping for a shot of Elaine in hiding. Headlines speculated about her love life, her next move, her supposed revenge. Elaine ignored them. She posted a single statement online: "Women are not defined by the worst thing that ever happened to them. We are not victims, we are survivors, builders, leaders, and sisters. I'm moving forward, and I hope you will too." Over time, the narrative began to change. People talked less about Carter's scandal and more about Elaine's resilience. Old acquaintances reached out, not to gossip, but to ask for advice, to say thank you, to apologize for underestimating her. Elaine forgave, but she did not forget. She was clear about her boundaries, her values, her right to choose her own path. Her transformation was not about becoming someone else. It was about coming home to herself, stronger and wiser for everything she'd endured. She found peace in the simple things: a long walk in the park, a call with her mom, a night spent writing stories just for herself. She learned that power isn't about dominating others, it's about knowing your own worth, and never letting anyone take it away again. By the time the anniversary of the gala arrived, Elaine barely recognized the woman she had been. She stood in her new home, looking out at the city, and felt a sense of joy. Not in spite of her scars, but because of them. She had rebuilt her life piece by piece, and every part of it was her own. Elaine was unbreakable, not because nothing had hurt her, but because nothing could keep her down for long. Revenge, to Elaine, never meant rage or humiliation. It meant truth. It meant power claimed quietly, but so visibly, that no one could ever doubt it again. She knew her moment was coming long before Carter saw the storm on the horizon. In her heart, she didn't want to destroy him. She wanted to free herself, and to make sure everyone saw who really held the cards. A year had passed since that infamous gala. The city buzzed with anticipation for this year's autumn charity event, held not in the old Hastings penthouse, but in the glass-walled ballroom atop the new Rockefeller Tower. It was the event of the season. Guests whispered about the guest list, the auction items, and most of all, about Elaine Miller. The press wondered if she would show her face. Would she come alone? Would she hide from Carter and Madison, now desperate to be seen as high society's new power couple? Elaine didn't hide. She arrived at the gala in a tailored black jumpsuit that turned heads, confident, sleek, with a sapphire pendant at her throat. Her hair was styled sharp, her eyes clear and calm. But the real transformation wasn't in her look. It was in the way she walked into the room. Unhurried, completely at peace with herself, meeting each stare with a polite, knowing smile. She was not there for drama. She was there for the truth. The whispers swirled as soon as she stepped through the doors. Carter, already flushed from champagne and praise, barely managed to keep his composure when he spotted her across the ballroom. Madison's face tightened, her practiced smile wavering for just a moment. The old friends who had abandoned Elaine found reasons to sidle over, offering thin apologies and hopeful handshakes. Elaine accepted their greetings with grace, but didn't linger. She didn't need their validation anymore. The evening's climax came when the charity board called Elaine to the stage, not as Carter's ex-wife, but as the new vice chair of the city's largest women's foundation. The spotlight found her. Applause filled the room. She took the mic, scanning the sea of faces, powerful, privileged, many of them once convinced she was finished. Her voice when she spoke was calm but unshakable. "Thank you. A year ago, I stood in a room like this and lost everything. At least, that's what I believed at the time. I was wrong. You don't lose yourself just because someone else decides you have no value. You find yourself piece by piece and you build a new life, one that's honest, one that matters, one that can never be taken from you by anyone." She looked directly at Carter and Madison, whose smiles were frozen for the cameras, their eyes panicked. The message was clear, even if she never said their names. "My only regret," Elaine continued, "is that I spent so long believing I needed to play by someone else's rules. I don't. Neither do any of you. We write our own stories, we make our own rules, and we never apologize for surviving." A standing ovation swept the room, louder and more heartfelt than any applause Carter had ever earned in his life. Madison slipped away from the stage, avoiding the photographers. Carter stood rooted, his world shifting beneath his feet. He was no longer the king of the ballroom. He was a cautionary tale. The man who lost everything, not because he was outsmarted, but because he never respected what he had. After the speech, Elaine was swarmed by old friends and new allies. Women she'd never met before pressed business cards into her hand, thanking her for her courage, her honesty, her example. She saw Olivia, her lawyer, across the crowd. They hugged. Two survivors, two women who had learned the hard way that dignity is the best revenge. But Elaine's real victory came when the night was nearly over. As guests filtered out, Carter tried to corner her near the exit, his tone forced and charming. "You were always good at speeches," he said, searching her face for some sign of regret. "Maybe we can." Elaine stopped him with a smile so gentle it was almost kind. "Carter, we're done. I hope you find what you're looking for, but you won't find it in power over other people." He stared at her, searching for the woman who used to need him, the woman he could control with a single word. But she was gone. All that was left was a grown woman who knew her own worth. As she stepped into the cool night, the press tried to catch her for one last quote. She paused, letting the city lights fall on her face. "I'm not interested in revenge," she said. "I'm interested in what comes next. For me, and for anyone who's ever had to start over, let this be proof. You can survive anything, and you can come back stronger than anyone expects." The headlines the next day were not about Carter or Madison or scandal. They were about Elaine. They were about hope, about power, about the silent smile of a woman who had everything taken from her and built it all again, this time on her own terms. The days after the gala felt different, brighter, as if someone had opened the windows in Elaine's life and let in a fresh, healing breeze. Her phone buzzed with messages, not the hollow sympathy of months past, but heartfelt gratitude and admiration. Young women from across the city and beyond wrote to her about courage, about starting over, about the way her words had shifted something deep inside them. Elaine read every message, sometimes with tears, always with awe. Each story echoed pieces of her own. Women rebuilding after betrayal, single mothers holding families together, college students chasing dreams no one else believed in. She realized then that her struggle had never been only about Carter, or even herself. It was about all the people who are told they're too quiet, too ordinary, too weak to make it on their own. People who are asked to shrink for someone else's comfort, or told to play a supporting role in someone else's story. Her journey had started in humiliation and heartbreak, but now, standing in her new life, Elaine knew she wouldn't change a thing. The pain she endured had become her power. The loneliness taught her self-reliance. The betrayal stripped away illusions, making space for honesty and real connection. She was not the same woman who once doubted her own worth. She was stronger, wiser, and, most importantly, she was finally, completely, herself. Elaine's story became a kind of legend, passed quietly from woman to woman in boardrooms, in cafes, in whispered conversations at the ends of long workdays. Her name became shorthand for, "Don't count her out." When women in her network faced their own crossroads, messy divorces, unfair bosses, the end of a dream, they thought of Elaine, of her silent smile, of the way she walked away from the ruins and built something better. She didn't stop at survival. She started a foundation dedicated to empowering women through education, legal support, and mentorship. She poured her time and heart into building scholarships, funding shelters, and creating resources for those with nowhere else to turn. She spoke honestly about her past, not as a victim, but as a living example of what's possible. At home, her parents visited often. Her mother, once quietly worried about her daughter's sadness, beamed with pride. Her father, who had taught her to change a tire, to speak up for herself, to never let anyone steal her voice, hugged her tighter every time he left. Their little house in Willow Creek became her retreat, a place where love was never conditional. Elaine's circle grew. She made friends who valued honesty over image, who laughed loudly and lived bravely. She dated again, not to fill a void, but to share joy. She discovered that real love, when it came, would never ask her to shrink. It would celebrate her strength. For Carter, the loss was a slow, public unraveling. His business deals soured, his parties grew thin, and the media grew tired of his old tricks. Without Elaine, he was just another headline, one more powerful man who thought he was untouchable until he wasn't. People whispered about karma, about lessons learned too late. Some pitied him, most forgot him. Madison faded into the background, replaced by newer faces eager for their own shot at the spotlight. But this was never about them. It was about Elaine, and about every woman watching, hoping, waiting for proof that starting over isn't the end. It's the beginning. In the closing scene of her story, Elaine stood on a rooftop, surrounded by the city's lights. She breathed in the night air, her heart at peace. She was no longer running from her past, nor from her pain. She was moving forward, with her scars, her strength, and her own future. She looked up at the sky, at the stars scattered above her, and smiled, a silent smile that said more than any words ever could. For every woman watching, for every person who's ever been counted out, Elaine's message is simple but true. You are not what's happened to you. You are what you do next. Strength doesn't mean never breaking. It means getting back up, again and again, no matter how hard the world tries to keep you down. The city would remember her name, but Elaine didn't need that anymore. Her legacy wasn't in the fortune she won or the headlines she made, but in the lives she touched and the hope she inspired. The final lesson, written not in court records or tabloid stories, but in the hearts of those who heard her. You are not powerless, you are not invisible, and you are never, ever alone. As the night breeze wrapped around her, Elaine whispered a promise, not just to herself but to anyone listening. I will never shrink again. And neither should you. The screen fades to black, but the story goes on, every day, in the courage of women everywhere who refuse to be broken, who in the end walk away with far more than a silent smile. So the story has ended, and our wonderful friends, are you still here with me until now? If you are, I know this story has touched something deep inside your heart. Maybe it's reminded you that no matter how badly someone tries to write you out of your own life, your real power is always there, waiting for you to claim it. Elaine's journey teaches us that what breaks us is sometimes what makes us unbreakable. She went through betrayal, loneliness, and the pain of starting over, but she chose not to let her story end there. She rebuilt herself with dignity, courage, and compassion, not just for herself, but for others too. This is what heterodox wisdom teaches us. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Healing starts when we dare to see ourselves as worthy, even in our lowest moments. If this story spoke to you, please like, share, and subscribe. Drop a comment. Tell me what part resonated with you most, or how you found your strength in hard times. We're building a community that believes no one is powerless and no one is alone. Let's inspire each other every single day. Ethan Caldwell strode through the high-end shopping mall, his polished shoes tapping against the marble floors with quiet authority. At 46, he was a self-made millionaire, a man who had built his fortune from the ground up in the world of luxury real estate. Today, he was here for a brief stop, just another routine business call before heading to a private meeting. His phone pressed to his ear. He spoke with the confidence of a man who had everything. "Yes, Mr. Daniels, the figures align perfectly. The market is in our favor," he said, his tone smooth. He adjusted his cufflinks as he walked, already envisioning the next lucrative deal that would solidify his status. Then, in the middle of the bustling crowd, he saw her. For a moment, the noise of the mall faded into nothing. His breath caught in his throat as his gaze locked onto a woman he never thought he'd see again, his former wife. 15 years had passed since the day he left her behind, convinced that walking away was the best decision for his future. Back then, he had chosen wealth and ambition over the life they had built together. But now, standing just a few feet away, she looked more radiant than he'd ever remembered. Time had not dimmed her beauty. It had refined it. Her smile was warm, her posture poised, and she carried herself with an effortless confidence that sent a pang of something unfamiliar through him. And she wasn't alone. Beside her was a young man, no older than 15. The boy had strong features, dark hair, and a presence that was impossible to ignore. Ethan felt his stomach twist. The resemblance was uncanny, the same sharp jawline, the same determined eyes. His mind raced. Could this boy be his son? A rush of emotions flooded through him. Shock, confusion, regret. He had walked away from his pregnant wife all those years ago, convincing himself that she and the child would be better off without him. He had buried the memory, choosing to focus on his relentless climb to success. Yet here she was, thriving, her life seemingly full without him. And the boy, was he his child? Had he unknowingly passed by his own son countless times over the years without realizing it? His chest tightened as he stood frozen in place. The wealth he had accumulated, the power he wielded, it all suddenly felt empty. He had sacrificed so much in pursuit of success, but in doing so, had he lost the one thing that truly mattered? As he watched them laughing together, an unfamiliar ache settled in his heart. He had spent 15 years believing he had everything. Now, with one chance encounter, he realized he might have lost it all. Ethan Caldwell tightened his grip on the phone, struggling to process what he was seeing. Just moments ago, his mind had been fully engaged in sealing a multi-million-dollar real estate deal. But now, all thoughts of business had vanished. Across the grand shopping plaza, Olivia stood by a decorative fountain, a soft smile on her face as she spoke to a teenage boy. Ethan's breath hitched. The boy's features were unmistakable. His sharp jawline, the way he stood with quiet confidence. It was like looking into a mirror of his younger self. A voice crackled through the phone, pulling him back to the present. "Mr. Caldwell? Are we still on the same page?" Mr. Daniels sounded impatient. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. His mind had suddenly rewound 15 years, back to the day Olivia had told him she was pregnant. He had convinced himself that leaving was the right choice, that wealth and ambition mattered more than fatherhood. Now, standing frozen in place, he realized how wrong he had been. "Mr. Caldwell?" Daniel's tone sharpened. Yes, of course," Ethan forced out, trying to focus. His gaze flickered back to Olivia and the boy, watching as they laughed together. A pang of regret clenched his chest. "Good. So we're agreed on the 15% stake?" Daniels confirmed. Ethan barely processed the question, his distracted mind automatically replying, "Yes." "Excellent. My legal team will finalize the paperwork immediately." The call ended, and cold realization struck Ethan like a punch to the gut. What had he just agreed to? His business instincts screamed that something was wrong. He replayed the conversation in his head, his stomach dropping. Had he just signed away a massive portion of his deal without even realizing it? His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Darren, his associate. Ethan hesitated, but finally picked up. "What the hell, Ethan?" Darren's voice was sharp. "Did you seriously just give away 15%? That's millions in lost revenue. What were you thinking?" Ethan's heart pounded. I made a mistake. We need to renegotiate. You think Daniels is going to let that slide? He has it in writing now." Ethan barely heard him. Across the plaza, Olivia and the boy were leaving, disappearing into the crowd. A desperate impulse took over. He started walking, following them at a distance, his pulse racing. The realization hit him like a freight train. He had built an empire, but in doing so had abandoned the one thing money couldn't buy, his family. As Darren's angry voice continued on the phone, Ethan wasn't listening anymore. His perfectly constructed world was beginning to crack. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure how to fix it. Ethan stared blankly at his phone, his grip tightening. The words from Darren still echoed in his mind. "It's too late, Ethan. Daniel's already signed. Do you have any idea what you just did?" His jaw clenched. Millions of dollars. Gone, because he had been too distracted by the past. The Ethan Caldwell of 10 years ago would have never made such a mistake. He had built his fortune on precision, on never losing focus. But today, his entire world had shifted in a matter of seconds. He shut his eyes briefly, trying to silence the storm of emotions threatening to consume him. The boy? A striking resemblance. Olivia. It was too much. He needed answers. Without overthinking, he pulled up an old contact and dialed. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Ethan Caldwell," the man on the other end said with a chuckle. "Didn't think I'd hear from you again. Leo, I need your services." There was a brief pause before the private investigator spoke again. "Who are we looking into?" Ethan exhaled. "Olivia Hayes. And the boy with her." After giving the necessary details, Ethan ended the call. A heavy mix of anticipation and dread settled over him. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what he might discover. Hours later, a manila folder lay on his desk. Ethan hesitated before flipping it open. The first few pages detailed Olivia's life after he left. His stomach twisted as he read about her struggles, how she lost her job due to complications with her pregnancy, how she barely made ends meet, and how she had nearly given up. His hands tightened around the pages as he reached the part that made his breath catch. She had almost put the baby up for adoption. She had gone as far as meeting with an agency. Ethan swallowed hard. His son, his own flesh and blood, could have been raised by strangers. And he never would have known. Flipping further, he found a name. Sophia Turner. According to the report, Sophia had found Olivia sitting on a park bench, sobbing days before the adoption papers were set to be signed. She had taken Olivia in, given her a home, and supported her through the darkest period of her life. Over time, the two women had built something extraordinary, a shelter for single mothers. Ethan leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. He had spent years assuming Olivia was fine without him, believing she was strong enough to handle anything. But the reality was far different. She had nearly lost everything, and yet she had built something remarkable from her pain. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something stir inside him, a need to make things right. He had walked away once. He wouldn't do it again. Ethan sat motionless in his chair, staring at the final pages of the report. The initial details had been painful enough. Olivia's struggles, her near homelessness, the agonizing decision to put their child up for adoption. But what came next sent a chill through him. Buried within the investigator's findings was something he never expected. His mother. Ethan had grown up believing his mother had died in a car accident when he was a boy. His father had told him the details so many times he had never questioned it. But the investigator's report showed no record of such an accident. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the documents again. Hospital records, death certificates, nothing lined up. And then one particular note caught his eye. A woman matching his mother's description had been seen at a small shelter in Chicago. A shelter, coincidentally, the same one Olivia had helped run. Ethan exhaled sharply, his mind racing. Had his father lied to him all these years? If so, why? What else had been kept from him? For years he had buried himself in success, believing money and power could fill the emptiness. Now, for the first time in decades, he felt like a child again, lost and searching for answers. Shaking off the emotions threatening to consume him, he picked up his phone. There was something he could do right now, something within his control. "Jeremy," he said when his accountant answered, "I need you to set up an anonymous donation." "To where?" "A shelter for single mothers, Chicago." There was a pause on the other end. "Any particular reason?" Ethan hesitated. "Just make sure it's untraceable." After finalizing the transaction, he leaned back, staring out over the city skyline. The guilt remained, heavier than before. He had abandoned his pregnant wife and unborn child for a dream of wealth, never once looking back. And yet, Olivia had turned her pain into something meaningful. She had built a sanctuary for women who had nowhere else to go. For the first time in years, admiration mixed with regret. Across town, Olivia sat in her office when her phone rang. It was the shelter's accountant. "Olivia, we just received a massive anonymous donation." Her eyebrows furrowed. "Anonymous?" "Yes, enough to fund operations for years." A slow sense of unease crept up her spine. No one had ever donated this much, especially without wanting recognition. And the timing, it didn't feel like a coincidence. She set the phone down and stared at the numbers on the screen. A name floated in the back of her mind, one she had spent years trying to forget. Ethan Caldwell. Had he finally come back? And if he had, what did he want? Ethan exhaled slowly as he tapped his fingers against the desk. His accountant's voice echoed through the speakerphone. "It's done, sir. The donation is completely untraceable." "Good," Ethan replied, his voice tight. "Keep me updated." He ended the call and leaned back, his eyes drifting toward the skyline beyond his office windows. He should have felt relief, maybe even satisfaction, but instead, there was only a gnawing uncertainty. Had he done this to help Olivia and the shelter? Or was this just a desperate attempt to ease his own guilt? Across town, Olivia sat at her desk, staring at the email notification about the massive donation. The amount was staggering, enough to fund the shelter for years. It should have been a moment of pure joy, but something about it felt off. She clicked through the transaction details, her instincts on high alert. Who would donate such a large sum without wanting recognition? "Sarah," Olivia called to her assistant. Sarah popped her head into the office. "Yeah? Can you look into this donation? See if there's any way to trace it back to the donor?" Sarah frowned. "You think there's a catch?" "I'm not sure," Olivia admitted, "but something about the timing feels too convenient." Meanwhile, Jake sat cross-legged on his bed, his laptop glowing in the dim light. For years, he had been curious about the father he never knew, but his mother had always dodged his questions. Tonight, he was done waiting for answers. As he absent-mindedly scrolled through company websites, an ad caught his attention. Caldwell Enterprises, summer internship program now open. His fingers hovered over the touchpad. It was one of the biggest real estate firms in the country, a name he had heard countless times in financial news reports. But more than that, something about the name Caldwell felt familiar. A plan began to form in his mind. If his mother wouldn't tell him the truth, maybe he could find it himself. "Hey, Mom," he called out, keeping his voice casual. "I think I found a summer internship I want to apply for." Olivia appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. "That's great, honey. Where is it?" Jake hesitated for a second. "Caldwell Enterprises. It's a huge company. Looks like a great opportunity." For the briefest moment, Olivia's face paled. It was so quick Jake almost missed it, but he saw it. Her reaction only confirmed his suspicions. "Sounds interesting," Olivia said after a pause. "Just make sure you explore all your options." Jake nodded, pretending to be uninterested. But as his mother walked away, he knew one thing for sure. She was hiding something. Ethan tapped his pen against his desk, staring at the latest reports on his screen. His focus kept drifting, his thoughts circling back to the shelter donation. He had told himself it was simply to ensure the funds were used properly. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the full truth. He was searching for any piece of Olivia's life that he had missed. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Caldwell, the summer internship applications are ready for review," his assistant Lisa said, handing him a stack of files. Ethan nodded, welcoming the distraction. "Thanks. Leave them here." As he flipped through the stack, a name jumped out at him. Jake Hayes. His breath caught in his throat. There was no way this was a coincidence. His pulse quickened as he scanned the application. Smart, ambitious, everything he had once hoped for in a son. He leaned back in his chair, gripping the paper tightly. Was Jake applying because he wanted to? Or was he searching for answers? Answers Olivia had refused to give him? Without allowing himself to hesitate, Ethan reached for the intercom. "Lisa, make sure Jake Hayes is on the shortlist for interviews." Across town, Olivia sat at her desk, staring at the donation confirmation. The money had saved the shelter from closing, but something about it didn't sit right. "Sarah," she called out. Her assistant peeked into the office. "Yeah? Any luck tracing the donation?" Sarah shook her head. "No name, no organization, just a massive wire transfer." Olivia's stomach twisted. Why now? After years of struggling, why would someone suddenly swoop in and help? The timing was too convenient. She exhaled, pressing her fingers against her temples. "Maybe it's time to tell Jake the truth," Sarah said softly. Olivia flinched. "I can't. There's so much he doesn't know." Sarah met her gaze. "But don't you think he deserves to?" Olivia swallowed hard. She had spent years protecting Jake from the truth. But was she only delaying the inevitable? Meanwhile, Jake stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his shirt. His heart pounded, his thoughts racing. Tomorrow, he would walk into Caldwell Enterprises. Tomorrow, he might finally get the answers his mother had kept from him. He had studied the company inside and out, preparing every possible answer to interview questions. But the real reason he was going wasn't to land an internship, it was to look Ethan Caldwell in the eye and see for himself. At that moment, Olivia appeared in his doorway. "Ready for your interview?" "Yeah," Jake said, forcing a grin. "Should be interesting." As she left the room, his smile faded. He was finally going to meet the man his mother refused to talk about. And he wasn't leaving without the truth. Jake sat across from Ethan Caldwell, his hands resting on his lap, his heart pounding harder than he wanted to admit. He had prepared himself for a tense, cold interview, but to his surprise, Ethan seemed genuinely interested in his answers. Ethan skimmed over his resume, nodding slightly. "You have strong analytical skills. What made you interested in real estate development?" Jake leaned forward, forcing himself to focus. "I've always been fascinated by how cities evolve. I want to create spaces that improve people's lives." Ethan smiled, a flicker of recognition in his expression. "That's exactly how I felt at your age." Jake stiffened at the comment but quickly masked his reaction. How much did this man really know? "Well, Jake," Ethan said, closing the file, "I think you'd be a great addition to our team. When can you start?" Jake stood, shaking his hand. "I'll be ready right away." As he left the office, his thoughts spiraled. The interview had felt too personal, like Ethan wasn't just evaluating him as an intern, but as something more. Over the next few weeks, Ethan took Jake under his wing. The resemblance was undeniable, far beyond just physical features. Their thought processes mirrored each other. Jake's instincts in business were sharp, his problem-solving skills natural. Every time Ethan looked at him, he saw pieces of himself. Jake, on the other hand, felt his resentment slipping into something far more dangerous. Admiration? He had spent years resenting the father who abandoned his pregnant wife, convinced the man was selfish, heartless. But now, seeing Ethan's drive, his brilliance, his ability to see solutions no one else noticed, Jake couldn't deny that he respected him. But something still felt off. One evening, long after most of the office had emptied, Jake sat at his desk, scrolling through internal company reports. A series of transactions caught his eye, numbers that didn't quite add up, deals that seemed too good to be true. His gut twisted. Opening a restricted file, his breath caught. A pattern of money transfers, hidden accounts, something was wrong. "This can't be right," he whispered. Was Ethan involved in something illegal? Meanwhile, Ethan had his own moment of realization. During a casual conversation about family, Jake had mentioned something that sent chills down Ethan's spine. "June 15th, Jake had said. "We always celebrate my mom's birthday by watching the sunset at her favorite park." Ethan's stomach dropped. June 15th, the exact day he had walked away from Olivia. For the first time, the doubt crept in. Was it possible? Could this boy be his son? As the pieces slowly fell into place, both Ethan and Jake realized they were on a collision course, one that would change everything. Ethan sat at his desk, staring blankly at the city skyline. June 15th. Jake had mentioned it so casually, his mother's birthday, the tradition of watching the sunset. But for Ethan, that date was burned into his memory, the day he walked away. He ran a hand through his hair. Could this really be a coincidence? Or was it the missing confirmation of something he already suspected? Before he could dwell on it further, a voice caught his attention. "Don't worry, Mom. I haven't forgotten why I'm here." Ethan froze. Jake stood just outside his office, phone pressed to his ear. His tone was calm, but something about his words made Ethan's stomach tighten. What did he mean by that? Before Ethan could confront him, his office door swung open. "We need to talk," Darren, his longtime business partner, said, his voice low. "It's about the new intern." Ethan's pulse quickened. "What about him?" Darren shut the door, glancing around before lowering his voice. "There's something off about this kid. He's been asking too many questions, poking around in places he shouldn't be." Ethan forced himself to stay composed. "He's ambitious. That's why I hired him." Darren shook his head. "It's more than that. He's digging, Ethan, looking into things that don't concern him. We need to keep an eye on him." As Darren left, Ethan sank into his chair. He had wanted to get close to Jake, to make amends for the past. But now that closeness threatened to destroy everything. Across the office, Jake sat at his desk, his eyes locked on his laptop screen. The files he had uncovered weren't just unusual, they were illegal. Money transfers, hidden accounts, fraud. The evidence pointed to something much bigger than he had imagined. And the worst part? It all led back to Ethan Caldwell. His hands clenched into fists. He had started this internship to find answers about his father, not to expose a scandal. But now, the truth was right in front of him, and he didn't know what to do with it. Meanwhile, Darren's suspicions were growing. He sat in his office, pulling up a search on Jake Hayes. If the kid was sniffing around where he shouldn't be, it was time to find out exactly who he was. Back in Ethan's office, he watched Jake leave for the night. A strange mix of emotions churned in his gut: pride, regret, and an increasing sense of dread. He was running out of time. Soon, he would have to make a choice: protect his empire or embrace the son he never knew he wanted. And either way, everything was about to come crashing down. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration tightening his chest. Something wasn't adding up. The numbers in the financial reports didn't match. Transfers had been disguised, payments funneled through offshore accounts. It was all too clean, too intentional. Before he could process it fully, his office door swung open. "Working late again?" Darren's voice carried a smug edge as he strolled in. "You should really learn to delegate more." Ethan looked up, his expression grim. "We need to talk." Darren arched an eyebrow. "Sounds serious." "I found discrepancies," Ethan said, sliding the reports across the desk. "The kind that could land us both in prison." Darren's smirk faded. "Now, Ethan, let's not be dramatic." "Dramatic?" Ethan scoffed. "Bribes, kickbacks, money laundering. How long has this been going on?" Darren's expression darkened. "Business is complicated, you know that. Complicated is one thing, illegal is another." Their voices rose, tension crackling between them. Neither of them noticed the figure standing just outside the office, listening. Jake had been passing by when he caught his father's voice. Something about the tone made him stop. "You really want to go down this road, Ethan?" Darren's voice dropped to a warning tone. "Remember, your hands aren't exactly clean either." Ethan's stomach clenched. "That real estate deal in Chicago? The zoning changes in Miami? I've got enough on you to take you down with me." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. He had justified those actions as necessary evils. But now? Now they felt like chains tightening around his throat. Outside the office, Jake pressed his back against the wall, his mind spinning. He had suspected corruption at Caldwell Enterprises, but this? His father wasn't just complicit, he was part of it. Darren straightened his tie, his smirk returning. "So what's it gonna be, partner?" Ethan's hands curled into fists. He had built this empire from the ground up, poured everything into it. The thought of losing it all was unbearable. But could he live with himself if he let this continue? For the next few days, he buried himself in the numbers. The deeper he dug, the worse it got. The corruption wasn't limited to a few bad deals. It ran through every level of the company. There were shell companies, fraudulent invoices, hidden accounts moving millions of dollars. And Darren wasn't working alone. Ethan uncovered ties to powerful figures, not just businessmen, but politicians. The kind of people who could erase problems or create them. Meanwhile, Jake had changed. He was more reserved, watching Ethan closely. His usual sharp questions laced with something else. Distrust. Had he overheard something? The thought filled Ethan with dread. Because if Jake had discovered the truth, then everything was about to fall apart. Jake hesitated outside Ethan Caldwell's office, gripping the file in his hands. Every instinct told him to walk away, to pretend he hadn't seen what he had, but he couldn't ignore it. Steeling himself, he knocked. Ethan looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "Jake, come in." Jake stepped inside, setting the folder down. "I've been running some projections and something doesn't add up." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Go on." "The revenue reports. Certain numbers don't make sense unless—" Jake hesitated. "Unless what?" Ethan asked, forcing his voice to stay calm. Jake met his gaze. "Unless something not entirely legal is happening." The accusation hung in the air between them. Ethan studied the boy in front of him, his son, though Jake didn't know it yet. The same determination, the same hunger for truth that Ethan himself once had. His jaw tightened. How much had Jake uncovered? "Business isn't always as simple as it looks in textbooks," Ethan said carefully. "Sometimes things are complicated." Jake exhaled, frustration flickering across his face. "I get that, but this looks like fraud." Ethan forced a calm smile. "Focus on your work. Learn what you can. But trust me, there are some things that are better left alone." Jake nodded, but Ethan saw the doubt in his eyes. As Jake walked out, Ethan sank back into his chair. He had protected his company, but at what cost? That night, unable to ignore the truth any longer, Ethan reached for his phone. "Leo, it's me. I need your help." The private investigator sighed. "I had a feeling you'd call. What's the job?" Ethan exhaled sharply. "This time, I need you to look into my own company, and be careful, this goes deeper than I ever imagined." As he ended the call, a cold realization settled over him. He had built Caldwell Enterprises from nothing, but had he lost control of it? The next morning, Ethan stood outside a familiar building. He adjusted the baseball cap on his head, pushing open the door to Olivia's shelter. The world she had built without him. Inside, the air buzzed with quiet activity. Women chatted in small groups. Children played in a corner. This wasn't just a shelter, it was a home. His gaze swept the room until it landed on Olivia. She stood near the reception desk, talking to one of the volunteers, unaware of his presence. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like an outsider in a life that could have been his, and he wasn't sure if he had the right to step back in. Ethan scanned the shelter, his heart pounding as he searched for a familiar face. "Can I help you?" He turned, and for a moment the air was sucked from his lungs. The woman standing before him had streaks of gray in her hair, her face lined with age, but he would recognize those eyes anywhere. "Mom?" The word left his lips before he could stop himself. Margaret's breath hitched. "Ethan?" Before either could react, he grabbed her arm and guided her toward a quiet corner. "What are you doing here?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I thought you were dead." Margaret's eyes filled with sorrow. "I never wanted to leave you, but I had no choice." Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him as she spoke. She told him everything, the years of abuse, the fear that had driven her to fake her death. His hands clenched into fists. "Then why didn't you take me with you?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Your father threatened to kill you if I ever tried." I thought you'd be safer if I was gone." Ethan's breath came in short, uneven gasps. The man he had spent his entire life trying to impress, the father whose approval he had chased relentlessly, had been a monster. A few feet away, Olivia stepped into the shelter. She paused, her gaze locking onto Ethan. Something about him stirred a distant memory, but she couldn't quite place it. With a small shake of her head, she turned to Margaret. "Do you have a moment?" Olivia asked. "I wanted to go over the donation again." Margaret gave Ethan a quick, meaningful glance before following Olivia toward the office. Ethan didn't wait. He slipped out of the shelter, his mind in turmoil. He had come here looking for answers about Olivia and Jake. Instead, he had unearthed a secret that shattered his entire past. Across town, Jake sat at his desk in Caldwell Enterprises, flipping through old records. Something wasn't adding up. He had been digging into the company's history, piecing together timelines and names. But now, a possibility he had never considered was staring him in the face. Could Ethan Caldwell be his father? Later that night, Olivia sat alone in her office, staring at an old photograph of Jake as a baby. The weight of the past pressed heavily on her. She had never told Jake how close she had come to giving him up for adoption. The fear, the desperation, it was a chapter of their history she had fought to bury. But some truths refused to stay hidden. Olivia stared at her screen, her pulse quickening as she read the latest email. The investigator had finally traced the donation. The funds led back to a shell company, and beyond that, Caldwell Enterprises. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it really be him after all these years? Across town, in his high-rise office, Darren poured himself a drink, a smug smile curling on his lips. He had been digging, watching, connecting the dots between Ethan, Olivia, and Jake. Now, he had leverage. The kind that could bring Ethan to his knees. "Oh, Ethan," he muttered, "you've been very, very careless." As the city lights flickered, 4 people lay awake, each haunted by their own demons. Ethan wrestled with his mother's revelations, the abuse, the lies, the realization that he had spent his life mirroring the very man he despised. Margaret, torn between guilt and the desperate hope of reclaiming the son she lost. Olivia, on the edge of uncovering a truth that could shatter everything. And Jake, terrified yet drawn to the growing suspicion that Ethan Caldwell was more than just his employer. The past was unraveling, and no one was prepared for what was coming. Ethan tossed in bed, his mother's voice echoing in his mind. How much of his father lived inside him? His ruthless ambition, his obsession with power. Had he unknowingly become the very thing he had spent his life outrunning? "I have to break this cycle," he murmured. But could he? His last thought before exhaustion claimed him was of Jake. Could he still be the father he never had? The morning sun barely crept through the blinds of Ethan's office when his door burst open. Jake stormed in, face flushed with anger, voice shaking. "We need to talk." Ethan sat up straight. He had been dreading this moment. "About what?" he asked carefully. Jake slammed a file onto the desk. "The company's finances, the fake accounts, the bribes." Ethan's stomach twisted. "I saw the documents," Jake continued, his hands clenching into fists. "How could you be involved in something like this?" Ethan felt every instinct urging him to deflect, to justify. He had spent years building an empire of wealth and influence, but now, looking at Jake, his son, though Jake still didn't know it, he realized none of it mattered. He exhaled slowly, meeting Jake's gaze. "You're right," Ethan said. And for the first time in his life, he knew he couldn't lie. Ethan exhaled, his voice low. "Jake, things have gotten out of control. I never meant for it to be this way. I'm trying to fix it." Jake's expression hardened. "Fix it? How? By covering it up?" Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. "Olivia?" His pulse quickened as he answered. "Ethan, it's me. We need to talk about the donation." His grip tightened on the phone. "Olivia, I can explain." "So it was you." Her voice held a mix of shock and anger. "Why now, after all these years?" Ethan searched for the right words, but before he could speak, the door burst open. Darren strolled in, eyes glinting with satisfaction. Well, isn't this a nice little family reunion?" Jake's head snapped toward Ethan. His face went pale. "Family?" Silence crashed over the room. Darren smirked. "Oh, come on, Ethan. The kid's smart enough to figure it out. He's your son, isn't he?" Ethan stood, hands shaking. "Darren, that's enough." Darren chuckled. "Oh, it's far from enough. I know everything about Olivia, about Jake, about your past." His voice darkened. "One word from me, and it all comes crashing down." Ethan clenched his jaw. "What do you want?" Darren leaned in. "Simple. You take the fall for the company's creative accounting, and I walk away clean. If you refuse, I expose everything." Jake's gaze darted between them, his world spinning. "You're blackmailing him, and you're actually considering it?" Ethan closed his eyes for a long moment, the weight of every lie, every decision suffocating him. When he opened them, he didn't just see Jake, he saw himself, years ago, desperate for the truth. He turned back to Darren, voice firm. "No more lies, no more cover-ups." Darren's smirk faded. "You're bluffing." "I'm not," Ethan said. "It's over. I'm coming clean." Darren's face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this." He spun on his heel and stormed out. Silence filled the space between Ethan and Jake. Jake swallowed hard. "Is it true? Are you really my father?" Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, and I'm so sorry, Jake, for everything." Jake stood frozen, emotions warring in his expression. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out. Ethan slumped into his chair, his world crumbling around him. His phone buzzed again. "Olivia." He took a deep breath and answered. "Olivia, there's a lot I need to tell you." "Can we meet?" Across town, Olivia hung up, her mind racing. Ethan. The man she had fought to forget was back. And worse, he had been the one behind the anonymous donation. What did it mean for her? For Jake? Tension simmered throughout the day. Jake avoided Ethan at work, resentment and confusion battling inside him. Olivia prepared for her meeting, anger and memories from the past colliding in her chest. Meanwhile, in his penthouse office, Darren paced. He wasn't going down without a fight. As the evening approached, Ethan made a choice. He would confess everything at the upcoming charity gala. The corruption, his past with Olivia, his relationship to Jake. No more secrets. Taking a deep breath, he reached for his phone. "Margaret," he said when his mother picked up, his voice heavy, "I need your help." The night before the gala, tension gripped them all. Ethan wrote his confession, knowing it could cost him everything. Jake wrestled with the truth about his father, torn between anger and curiosity. Olivia prepared for a confrontation she had avoided for years. And Darren, desperate, set his final plan into motion. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the city. The stage was set. Tomorrow, everything would change. The morning of the gala, the air was thick with unease. Ethan sat at his desk, pen poised over a blank page. "How do you confess to years of deception?" "I've made mistakes," he wrote. Then, shaking his head, he crossed it out. Too simple, too empty. Across town, Darren hunched over his computer, a twisted grin spreading across his face. He had spent the night digging, and he had found gold. Not only did he have enough evidence to bury Ethan, but he had something on Olivia too. He printed the documents, scanning them with satisfaction. A few financial discrepancies. Nothing significant, but twisted the right way, it could look like fraud. Meanwhile, Olivia paced her living room, the invitation to the gala sitting untouched on her coffee table. Could she face Ethan again? "Mom?" Jake's voice pulled her back. He stood in the doorway, his expression carefully guarded. "Are we going to this thing?" She studied his face, seeing the same conflict she felt reflected in his eyes. "I don't know, honey." Jake shrugged, trying to appear indifferent. "I mean, do you want to?" "It's for the shelter, right?" Jake adjusted his tie, avoiding his mother's gaze. "We should go. It's not about him." But they both knew that was a lie. Across the city, Margaret stood in front of the mirror, her fingers trembling. She took a breath, practicing the words she had long feared to say. "I'm Margaret Caldwell," she whispered to her reflection. "Ethan's mother." The name felt foreign on her tongue, but for the first time in decades, it felt right. As the day stretched on, Ethan surprised himself. The decision to come clean, though terrifying, brought a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, he wasn't running. His phone buzzed. A message from Leo, his investigator. "Found something about Olivia. You should know." Ethan clicked on the attachment. As he read, his stomach twisted. Olivia had nearly given Jake up for adoption. He had judged her for so long, never knowing how close she had come to making the same choice he had. Meanwhile, Darren leaned back in his chair, reviewing the final pieces of his plan. Timing was everything. As soon as Ethan confessed, he'd release the information about Olivia's supposed fraud. One move. 2 lives ruined. At sunset, Jake stood in front of his closet, staring at the suit he hadn't worn in years. A part of him wanted to skip the gala altogether, to avoid Ethan, avoid whatever truths were about to be exposed. But another part of him, one he barely wanted to acknowledge, was curious. What would Ethan say? What secrets had been buried all this time? A soft knock at his door. "Jake," Olivia said, "we should leave soon, if we're going." He inhaled deeply. "Yeah, Mom, I'll be ready in a minute." Olivia nodded, but her hands gripped the doorknob tightly. She had no idea what Ethan was planning to reveal, but she knew one thing. Tonight would change everything. At the shelter, Margaret helped with the final preparations, her nerves barely contained. Tonight, she would reunite with her son. She would finally have a chance to explain, to make amends. As the sky darkened, Ethan stood in his office, staring out over the city that had made him powerfully destroyed him. Every lie, every betrayal, every lost year with his son had led to this moment. His phone buzzed. "Darren. Last chance, Ethan. Back out now, or I release everything." Ethan didn't hesitate. He deleted the message. There was no going back. As the first guests arrived at the gala, Ethan stepped out of his car, straightening his tie. It was time. Ethan straightened his tie as he stepped out of his car. Tonight, everything would come to light. A few minutes later, Olivia and Jake arrived, both tense but resolute. Across the venue, Darren slipped through a side entrance, a folder tucked under his arm, a weapon designed to destroy reputations. And finally, Margaret took a steadying breath before stepping inside. Tonight, she would no longer be a secret. The gala buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, but beneath the glamour, tension crackled. Ethan moved through the crowd, nodding to familiar faces, but his focus remained on the podium. Then, his eyes met Olivia's. For a fleeting second, everything else faded. The past, the betrayals, the choices that had led them here. He turned to the microphone, gripping the edges of the podium. "Good evening, everyone. I have something important to share." The crowd quieted. "For years," he began, voice steady, "I've built this empire, but I haven't done it honestly." As Ethan continued, Darren weaved through the guests, smirking as he approached Olivia. "Mrs. Hayes," he murmured, handing her a file, "I think you'll find this enlightening." Olivia's hands shook as she flipped through the documents. Her breath caught. "This isn't possible." Meanwhile, Jake stood frozen, eyes locked on Ethan. The man he had started to respect was confessing to crimes. His stomach twisted. Had everything been a lie? Without thinking, Jake stepped forward. His voice cut through the silence. "How could you?" Ethan stopped mid-sentence. "You're nothing but a fraud," Jake continued, voice shaking. "You pretended to be this great leader, this mentor, but you're just another criminal." The room gasped. Murmurs spread like wildfire. "Is that his son?" someone whispered. "I didn't know Caldwell had a child." Olivia rushed to Jake's side, trying to calm him, but as she did, her gaze landed on Ethan. Her breath hitched. "You," she whispered. Realization dawned. "You were the mysterious donor." Ethan stepped down from the podium, his confession momentarily forgotten. "Why?" Olivia's voice wavered, equal parts anger and disbelief. He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, the damage had already been done. In the face of this confrontation, "Olivia, I can explain," Ethan said, his voice low. "Explain what?" Olivia snapped. "How you walked away. How you suddenly decided to show up and play the hero." As tension crackled between them, Darren saw his opportunity slipping away. He grabbed the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice smooth yet menacing. "Since we're all being honest, let me share some truths about our dear Olivia and her so-called charitable shelter." Before he could continue, Margaret pushed through the crowd. "That's enough," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I won't let you destroy this family any further." The room fell silent. "Who is she?" someone murmured. Margaret took a steadying breath. "I'm Margaret Caldwell, Ethan's mother." Gasps echoed through the hall. Ethan turned to her, his mind reeling. He had known she was alive, but seeing her here standing before him was something else entirely. "Mom?" he whispered. Margaret began to speak, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. She told them everything, the abuse, the threats, why she had disappeared. The crowd listened in stunned silence. Ethan felt something shift inside him. The years of anger and resentment began to fade, replaced by something new, understanding. Across the room, Jake and Olivia exchanged a glance, their own frustrations momentarily forgotten. Darren, watching his plan unravel, made one last desperate attempt. "This is all very touching," he sneered, "but it doesn't change the fact that Olivia has been embezzling from the shelter." Olivia's breath caught. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Darren waved a folder in the air. "I have proof right here." Ethan's expression darkened as he stepped forward. "No, you don't, Darren." His voice was cold, controlled. "Those documents are fake, and you know it." Darren's face paled. "How did you?" "I've known about your schemes for weeks," Ethan said. "I was just too much of a coward to stop you, until now." Darren stammered, but the weight of Ethan's words crushed any attempt at a response. Jake, watching his father stand his ground, felt something unexpected stir inside him. Maybe Ethan wasn't who he thought he was. Olivia, still processing the chaos, turned to Ethan. "Why didn't you tell me about the donation? About everything?" Ethan met her gaze. "I was ashamed, Olivia, of what I'd done, of who I'd become. I thought I could make amends without facing you." He swallowed hard. "I was wrong." The weight of the truth settled over the room. Ethan exhaled and turned back to the crowd. "I've made terrible mistakes. I've hurt people I love. I've broken laws." He looked at Olivia, Jake, and his mother. "But first, I need to make things right." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "This is Ethan Caldwell," he said into the phone. I'd like to turn myself in for financial fraud and corporate corruption. Chaos erupted. Olivia grabbed his arm. Ethan, what are you doing? What I should have done years ago. His voice was calm, resolute, taking responsibility for my actions. As security arrived to escort him out, Ethan turned back to the faces in the crowd. Olivia, Jake, his mother. I'm sorry for everything, he said. I hope one day you'll be able to forgive me. Then he was gone. The gala had transformed into something none of them expected. By the end of the night, they all knew nothing would ever be the same. Days later, Ethan stood in a federal courtroom, shoulders squared. Despite everything, he held his head high. Your Honor, he began, voice steady. I am here to confess to years of financial fraud, bribery, and corruption. The room fell silent. He spoke of falsified records, illegal business deals, the lies he had built his empire upon. With every admission, he felt both relief and regret. I take full responsibility for these actions, he concluded. No one else should suffer for my mistakes. The judge's gavel slammed down, 5 years in federal prison. As the officers approached with handcuffs, Ethan's eyes found Olivia, Jake, and Margaret in the gallery. Shock, pain, something else he couldn't quite name. Was it respect? Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Mr. Cop Caldwell, did you really turn yourself in? What about your family? Is it true you've been living a double life? Olivia pushed through the crowd, shielding Jake from the cameras. Margaret followed, her gaze locked on Ethan as he was led to a waiting police car. The next morning, newspapers across the country ran the story. Billionaire tycoon confesses to corporate fraud. Ethan's face was everywhere. His fall from grace dissected by analysts and reporters eager for scandal. In the quiet of their home, Olivia and Jake sat in stunned silence, trying to process it all. Why did he do it? Jake asked, voice small. Why did he turn himself in? Olivia sighed. I think he was trying to protect us, in his own way. Jake nodded, his emotions tangled. Anger, confusion, and a reluctant sense of admiration. Do you think we should visit him? Olivia hesitated. Let's give it some time, she said finally. We all need to process this. Across town, Margaret sat alone in her small apartment, staring at an old photo of the son she had lost and the man he had become. Margaret sat alone in her apartment, flipping through an old photo album. Her fingers traced the faded image of a young Ethan, his eyes bright with ambition. I should have been there, she whispered. Maybe things would have been different. As the weeks passed, the effects of Ethan's confession rippled through the community. At first, Olivia's shelter faced scrutiny. The scandal threatened to shut its doors for good until an unexpected wave of support flooded in. People saw Ethan's attempt at redemption and responded with generosity. Donations poured in. Olivia threw herself into keeping the shelter afloat, fielding endless questions about Ethan Caldwell. What surprised her most was how often she found herself defending him. Jake, meanwhile, buried himself in his studies, struggling to make sense of his feelings. To his own surprise, he started spending time at the shelter. Helping others seemed to quiet the storm inside him. 3 months into Ethan's sentence, Olivia and Jake finally made their first visit to the prison. The sight of Ethan in a jumpsuit, his face lined with exhaustion, hit them harder than they expected. I'm so sorry, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. For everything. Olivia nodded, unable to find words. Jake hesitated, then slowly reached out and squeezed his father's hand. As they left the prison, neither spoke, but something had shifted. The anger and resentment weren't gone, but for the first time, forgiveness didn't seem impossible. Margaret visited Ethan often. Their conversations, once strained, began to carry warmth. They talked about the past, the choices that shaped them, and the future Ethan was trying to build. 6 months in, Ethan received unexpected news. Because of his cooperation in exposing larger corruption networks, his sentence was reduced. He would be released in just a few months. Reactions were mixed. Some called it justice served, while others criticized the system for favoring the wealthy. To Ethan, it was a second chance, one he wasn't sure he deserved. As his release date approached, Ethan reflected on the road that had brought him here. The lies, betrayals, and damage he had caused, but also the confession, the truth, and his effort to make things right. He thought of Olivia and Jake, of his mother, and the community he had both harmed and helped. That night, lying in his prison cell, Ethan stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, he would step back into the world, a changed man. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding trust, proving himself, it would take time. But as Ethan Caldwell stood at the gates of Maplewood Correctional Facility, breathing in the cold morning air, he felt something he hadn't in years: hope. The price of redemption had been high, but as he stepped forward, he knew one thing: it had been worth it. A month later, Ethan found himself standing at the entrance of Olivia's shelter, his heart hammering. It was his first day as a volunteer. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. Conversations quieted, heads turned, whispers spread. Across the room, Olivia met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "I need to make things right. Let me start here." She studied him for a long moment, then handed him a mop. "The kitchen needs cleaning." He got to work. Every movement felt heavy under the weight of suspicious glances and quiet judgment. He didn't blame them. He had a long way to go. Weeks passed. The tension didn't disappear overnight, but little by little, it softened. Ethan took on every task: cleaning, repairs, unloading donations. No job was beneath him. One evening, as he grabbed his coat to leave, a longtime volunteer stopped him. "You know," she said, "you're not what I expected." Ethan smiled. A small victory. At home, things were more complicated. Jake, now in college, was adjusting to life on his own. Despite the distance, an unspoken question lingered between them. Could they ever be father and son? Ethan knew he couldn't force an answer. All he could do was keep proving he was a different man. This story is more than just about redemption and second chances. It's about the choices we make and whether we have the courage to own our mistakes and change. Ethan had every reason to keep running from his past, but he didn't. He faced his failures head-on, knowing that rebuilding trust wasn't about words, but about consistent actions over time. That's the biggest lesson here. Redemption isn't given, it's earned. Think about your own life. Have you ever made a mistake that felt impossible to come back from? Have you ever hurt someone, intentionally or not, and wondered if you could ever fix it? The truth is, people don't expect perfection, but they do expect honesty and effort. So here's my challenge to you. If there's a relationship in your life that needs repairing, take the first step. Maybe it's apologizing, maybe it's showing up consistently, maybe it's simply being better than you were yesterday. Change won't happen overnight, but every small effort matters. What do you think? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to rebuild trust? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more powerful stories that inspire real change. Let me know if you want a different angle or deeper analysis.